Alright, and now we must discuss Iron Man 2. In the rankings of the MCU, this one pretty unanimously comes in at the bottom.
Yeah, it's not a terrible movie.
Yeah, it's
really.
still got fun visuals and some good moments in there.
And you still got most of the cast back. Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow are still there and doing their thing as Tony and Pepper. So there's good stuff here, good action, but it just doesn't all fit together. And there's a reason that it's not as good. Basically, even with all their grand plans, they weren't expecting Iron Man to be as successful as it was. So when it was a huge hit, they're like, okay, we got to keep this going. So they basically had to slap together a sequel in a hurry, essentially. So that's why the whole movie feels kind of
rushed and not thought out.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably because it was rushed and not thought out. You get kind of this, weak sauce, demon in the bottle, mixed with a weak sauce, Armor Wars thing going on. It all feels, like there's barely a story here. This whole driving thing is his arc reactor's killing him now, so he's got to find a way to solve that, and eventually he does, and then he fights a bad guy at the end, and that's kind of the whole thing.
I've often looked at different superhero movies, especially old ones, and pondered, okay, how could they have improved this by using more stuff from the comics?
Yeah.
See, I wonder if instead of
usually more supervillains, because there's not enough of those.
Yeah, I wonder about the character of Whiplash, who I feel like might be the biggest single problem with this movie. I mean, Mickey Rourke's pretty good in the role, but I feel like maybe we don't need one centralized villain like that, especially since this guy's kind of combines different elements from different Iron Man villains. Mainly, they call him Whiplash, but he's actually more like the Crimson Dynamo. I think Ivan Vanko is actually the Crimson Dynamo in the comics. So it kind of makes sense that he has his own suit of armor at the end of the movie for the final boss battle.
Yeah, and then he just put whips on that. So he's Crimson Dynamo and Whiplash, literally.
Yeah, and this is even more confusing these days because a version of original recipe Whiplash from the comics has shown up on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he basically just has a long razor wire with a knife on the end, and that's his whip. So I wonder if instead of just one central bad guy, maybe they could have somehow worked in multiple bad guys, multiple other guys with armor from the comics. Like Titanium Man and Crimson Dynamo, for example. Kind of go through a series of fights instead of fighting a bunch of faceless drones that they can just mow down. And I suppose they could have included that too. But I wonder if they could have worked out a finale where Tony and Rhodey have to fight through a series of bad guys in order to save the day at the end.
I want my bird.
What?
I'm watching the scene where Whiplash first shows up on the racetrack, which is actually a really cool scene. And we're like, this might be cooler if he was just like the first of a bunch of bad guys to show up. It's like, okay, somebody's figured out how to duplicate the arc reactor technology.
What if before this scene we'd had Iron Man get into a skirmish with some other supervillain he'd never seen before, like say an early beta version of Dynamo, and Iron Man finds a way to beat that guy using some kind of trick with his armor, and then that guy's either apprehended, but anyway, he's being controlled by the Mickey Rourke character, who is observing the fight. Then he upgrades his suit so that when he attacks Tony this time on the racetrack, that trick that he used before doesn't work. It just kind of ramps things up a little bit. Instead, that's basically our first big chunk of action there. And it's full on combat. I've heard people complain about how does it make sense that he's able to deflect Iron Man's repulsor blasts with his electro whips? And I'm like, because it's a comic book fight. That's how things work in there.
Yeah, but
it's all just spectacle.
It's kind of weird thing. It's like, I'm pretty sure you could just shoot this guy with a regular old bullet, and that would put him down better than the repulsor is.
Pretty sure he's not quite that slick with the whips that he can deflect a bullet.
Yeah, this is the first time they recast one of the characters from another film with Don Cheadle playing Rhodey instead of Terrence Howard. And I think that Don Cheadle does make a much better Rhodey than Terrence Howard ever did. Terrence Howard, he has pretty good chemistry with Robert Downey Jr. But now I feel like he was kind of miscast, and Don Cheadle is much better in the film and has much better back and forth with Tony.
But there are a lot of elements in this movie that kind of bring it down. Like there's a whole middle section where he's hanging out with Black Widow and Nick Fury, and then later Agent Coulson. That's just like we just put the brakes on the whole movie so we could set stuff up for the Avengers movie we're gonna make later.
Yep.
And yeah, that's one of the of all the movies in the MCU, this is one that most falls victim to. We don't actually want to make a movie. We just want to make a trailer for for the big one.
They're still ironing out the kinks in the whole shared universe.
Ironing.
There was a really good scene where Tony watches footage from his dad.
Yes. Here played by John Slattery.
Yeah, and then later played by a guy who looks nothing like John Slattery. I could definitely have gone for like an updated Armor Wars thing where Tony fights a bunch of bad guys while he's going through some kind of personal crisis.
Yeah.
With his company is not really going his way.
That's convention. I feel like a lot of with all these superhero movies who are getting made and all their variety, it hasn't broken out. It's like we'd have to pick one guy to be the main villain, and we're gonna do him. Even if we have multiple villains, like you see in the older Batman movies or the Spider-Man movies, each one has to be the main villain. We don't really see much of. We're just having fight a series of lesser villains.
Yeah.
And maybe we can have a main villain among those. But just so we don't have to, stretch this particular villain's story over 3 acts and give him a whole tragic backstory or anything. No, he's there for like 1 or 2 scenes for a fight scene, and then that's it. Yeah. And they've done it a couple times, which we'll cover, but not really this time.
Yeah, I want to see a story that is unique to Iron Man, that is not just filler.
Now another thing at the core of the movie has to do with the subplot with the arc reactor in his chest is slowly killing him, and the solution to that I think is another one of the movie's big WTF bits, where here's how I understand it, and this is one of the things that if they could have spent more time writing this movie, they could have made sense of it. He needs to find another element to serve as a power source, but no such element exists. And then as Tony is going over his father's old notes, he discovers specs encoded in the diorama for his, Disneyland or whatever, that lead him to specs for another theoretical element that his father was working on. And so, as his father says in the video, he tells Tony, "I am limited by today's technology." So he figures out the specs for this element, and it just so happens that this theoretical element is a perfect replacement for the arc reactor. It's just a little bit too contrived for me. I don't like rewatching this movie very much. Not as much as the other ones. This is usually the movie where I, go off to the side and go get a snack or something like that.
Yeah, totally.